there will be more convergence in a number of areas, including deductibility of interest, including controlled foreign company rules, including mandatory disclosure rules that oblige taxpayers and promoters to go to the tax administration and say, that's the scheme I am selling, or that's the scheme I am using. And on hybrid mismatch arrangements, which are like financial instruments that allow taxpayers to basically get the best of the two worlds in the countries concerned. Finally, measures to ensure more predictability. We know that once you change the rules, there will be a period of transition and there will be new rules. And we also know that today, even with the old rules, countries are not doing great in terms of resolving disputes among themselves. So the focus there has been on finding mechanisms to improve the resolution of disputes. And for countries that are willing to go there, which may not be the case for India, I hope I can say one day not yet the case for India, also arbitration as a way to solve disputes when the government authorities are not able to do that among themselves. And finally, 2 analytical reports, one on the digital economy, which effectively captures the entire spectrum of BEPS, but at the same time is a more forward-looking type of study, which says, look, we are actually in the middle of a big revolution here. And we have only probably seen the beginning of it. But if you think about what's going to happen in the future with 3D printing is going to change manufacturing. If you think about what's going to happen with robotics, that are able to take decisions on their own, not because they have been programmed to take decisions. They are able to analyze and through the artificial intelligence take decisions. Now, mind you, the system we have today allocates profits based on decisions taken by people. Once decisions will be taken by robots, where do you go? The sharing economy, where today actually there are plenty of barter transactions going on, which we don't even realize. You have a free email account. Why? Well, because probably you give in exchange something, but we don't realize that. What do we give in exchange? Data. And these data then are monetized in some way by selling you more products, by selling the data to those that may be interested in them, or by selling internet advertising or like targeted advertising. Now, all these things may not be as pressing as BEPS, where you have basically the corporate tax system bleeding, but they may become very urgent very soon, and therefore what we did was to look at what the potential options are in order to address these challenges. And hopefully, where in the next few years, we will also have the data to give a concrete estimation of the extent of the issue, countries will be able to take a decision. Finally, we did the feasibility study on doing a multilateral treaty to amend in one go all the bilateral tax conventions of the countries that are party to this treaty. We worked with international public law experts, with tax law experts, and the conclusion was, yes, it's doable. I will spare you these, but this is, like, in my view, you know, like BEPS in a nutshell. And that's what happens in the real world. And you will see that all of the different actions that I have mentioned affect all the different elements that are there. So what we're trying to do here is not to kill one or another scheme. What we're trying to do is to address the roots of the problem by making sure that it doesn't happen. And then the jury is out, and we will see whether we succeeded or not. What we will be doing next? There is some technical follow-up work to be done, fine, nothing major, but there are details to be addressed here and there. And now the focus is, and will be in the future, on supporting and monitoring the implementation of these measures. And this will have to be done in an inclusive manner. Now we have G20 OECD countries, they represent 90% of the world GDP. We want to go further and get to 100%. How do I see implementation? It depends, because the outputs are different. So you have outputs like the changes to the transfer pricing guidelines, which I referred to before. Well, they may actually be already applicable. It depends on the country legal and tax system. But I think those of you that are familiar with tax also know that, like, basically the transfer pricing guidelines are applied by governments, by tax advisors, by taxpayers, and by judges. Then you have the changes to this model treaty, but it's still a model treaty. So what you need to look at is the hard law, is the real treaty that you have. India, Mauritius, just to take one random example. Now, how do we implement all this? Via the multilateral instrument. Countries are at the moment already in the process of drafting this multilateral instrument, and the uptake was incredible. We have 87 countries that have said we want to join, and the idea is that this will be opened up for signature in 2016. Difficult, extremely complex, beautifully complex, I would say, for someone like me that loves tax and international tax, and 1 year time to do it. And then the other recommendations, which will require domestic law changes. Country by country reporting, depending again on the legal system. The United States has already, the Treasury has already gone out and said, we can do it without changing the law. Other countries may have to change the law. It depends on the tax system. Harmful tax practices, the same. All the patent boxes that were analyzed, 16 of them, they were found inconsistent with the Nexus approach, with the approach that was developed in the context of this project. They have to change. Rulings, they have to exchange them. Hybrid mismatch arrangements. Again, are countries introducing them? Are they protecting their tax base? If not, the other country will do it. Interest deductibility. We have agreement on a common approach that basically would, on the one hand, curtail the opportunities to load companies with debt and reduce taxable income. And on the other hand, if it's done by a significant number of countries, will also reduce the usual argument that is brought to policymakers, which is competitiveness. Every time you want to do something, competitiveness. Because if you do it and the other doesn't do it, well, then we are at a competitive disadvantage. Well, governments are committed to do it all together. So we eliminate this problem. CFC rules, more difficult there. Why? Because CFC rules actually reflect the entire tax policy of the country. And countries have different tax policies. So that report there will have more of a kind of menu of options. If you want to tackle these issues, this is what you should do. And finally, mandatory disclosure rules. To conclude, whether the project is successful or not is a judgment call. I think from my perspective, from where we are now, there are situations where you can say, you know, the glass is half empty, half full. That's not this case. This glass is 85% full. But there will be people that will focus on the 15%. I'm aware of that, and I'm happy to discuss that. But the real proof, the real evidence will be with the implementation, and will be with monitoring the impact of the measures over time, and see if we get where we wanted to be at the beginning of the project, realigning taxation with economic activities and value creation. The G20 finance ministers last week or 2 weeks ago in Ankara, they called on the OECD to develop an inclusive framework for this monitoring. And that's what we are trying to do at the moment. And what the Committee on Fiscal Affairs will be discussing next week for the pleasure of Akhilesh and myself, starting from Sunday, because BEPS is so short time that we also have to work on Sundays. And in that context, capacity building will be key. There are no good rules if the rules are not applied correctly. And that's where you need that cascading effect, where from the level of Mr. Ranjan, it goes down to the tax auditor that is applying the rules. That will be the challenge. How do we spread this knowledge around in a way that the rules are applied appropriately and achieve the results that they're meant to achieve, and we have a feeding back mechanism that says, look, something went wrong here, we may need to do something else, or we may need to adjust. As I said, we are working on this. We don't know yet where we will end up, but we do have some very positive precedents, like the Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information, what I call the killer of bank secrecy. Bank secrecy was a reality 5 years ago. It's not anymore. And why? Because governments sat together and said, we are committed to do this. And they are doing it. We can do the same thing here, and everyone will eventually be better off. Multinationals, because they will have more certainty and more predictability. Tax administrations, because they will have an easier way to carry out the job and collect the revenue that it belongs to them. And the society at large, because we will have again restored trust in the system by saying governments, when they want, they are able to achieve results working together, 44 countries, even if it's only a very short time frame of 2 years. So to me, this is the best evidence that the top-down approach works. And that's something that will probably be part of the debate going forward. To conclude, as I said, I don't believe that a system meant to avoid double taxation, which is the key goal of the system, is to promote cross-border trade and investment. But a system that promotes that wants to avoid double taxation cannot promote double non-taxation. Double taxation over. That's the expectation at this stage, that the implementation of the measure will put an end to that. Countries will be able to protect their tax base. And as I said, to me, this is a won bet. And was not an easy one. I can tell you, 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, when I was going around saying, we are doing this, and we are doing it with all the OECD and G20 countries, people were like, yeah, sure. Come back in 20 years and we will see where you are. And I always told them, look, I got the same face when we said, we are going to do the Multilateral Convention on Exchange of Information in 9 months. And we did it. The same multilateral convention that is now the basis to exchange information to prevent tax evasion, not declaring, and that eventually can also be used now to exchange information on the country-by-country report, and therefore tackle instances of avoidance by multinationals. Next challenge, to be as global as we can and go beyond OECD and G20 and include all other interested countries. As I said, the jury's out. I'm happy to come back in 1 year, in 2 years, and see whether we effectively achieved the objective that we had in front of us. Thank you very much.
I now request Mr. Akhilesh Ranjan to express his view.
Well, thank you for that excellent presentation Mr. Russo has given to all of us, and I think it's evident to all that looking at the wide range of topics and issues that have been discussed have been addressed in the BEPS project, it's tremendous work actually, and 2 years was actually a very, very short time to really address all these issues. But then we must all be very grateful for the efforts of the OECD led by Mr. Russo and his colleagues, who have planned and implemented and gone ahead with all these discussions in different fora and coordinated all the efforts in such a way that some tangible, very tangible results are going to come out in early October this year. So the importance of the project, I don't think I need to go into that. It is a G20 sponsored project. The G20 itself realized that this is an extremely important area where work has to be done. And it's obvious that all countries, whether developed, developing or emerging or at any level of development, I think need to think about these issues. What is particularly notable about this project actually is the involvement of the developing countries. Mr. Russo had mentioned how the BEPS project went ahead and engaged with developing countries in many different ways. I think that is the distinguishing feature of this project. It is not like any other, let's say, OECD work or a work only of the IMF, let's say, or of any one single body. It's work which has taken inputs from all categories, all types of nations, and in a way that and it has been evident that people have been willing to discuss and understand each other's concerns and find mutually acceptable solutions. And that, I think, it's an extremely important part of this project. That's the aspect which gives it more credibility, and it also makes us believe that implementation of these outcomes will be possible, it will be done, and will lead to results on a global basis. So now, what really, just like to spend some more time on this, and how exactly do developing nations or can developing nations benefit or participate or evolve along with this BEPS project. The first very important outcome of these reports would be the idea of increased transparency in international business. The transparency through the country-by-country reports, which Mr. Russo just mentioned, a whole lot of data which will be available to the tax administrations, to the transfer pricing people. The transparency in countries spontaneously or voluntarily exchanging information about their tax rulings, about developments in their countries. Transparency in enterprises having to disclose or report the arrangements that they are intending to put in place for in their tax affairs, the mandatory disclosure rules. A whole era, a whole new world of transparency is opening up. And this is something which is of extreme importance for all countries, particularly the developing countries, including India, where we have always been starved of information. We have always wanted more and more information about foreign business coming into India, and have always been facing these roadblocks in trying to understand how multinational enterprises are operating and what exactly are they doing in my country. This era of transparency, these mechanisms that now will be implemented, are really going to be of immense benefit in understanding what's happening in the country and outside, and in understanding how multinational enterprises are operating, in then utilizing our very scarce resources in the areas in which they are really required to protect and augment our tax bases. So transparency is a huge outcome which is expected to come out of this whole BEPS project. The second aspect, the whole idea of cooperation. That's all these while in the tax world we have heard of the work being done by the OECD and some work being done by the United Nations in their committee of experts, of tax experts. No other body really has seriously taken up tax work anywhere. Now this project signifies a move towards cooperation. It signifies the fact that every country now realizes that you cannot just legislate on your own. You cannot just introduce your practices on your own. You're dealing with the whole world, and therefore policies have to be generated by mutual discussion. They have to come out as mutual agreements. And that degree of cooperation is something which has really been ushered in a large way by this BEPS project. In developing countries, which probably never had a voice in formulation of tax policies, now do have a voice, and they have been contributing. They have been coming out with their own concerns. They have been voicing those concerns, and there is a clear willingness on the part of all countries to listen to these concerns, to try and assimilate those concerns into the solutions that are being developed. So that's another major outcome of this BEPS project as far as the developing nations are concerned. On the more technical or practical points of view, or on the platforms, the treaty measures that are going to come in, the suggested changes, the minimum standards in treaty regulation, in treaty drafting of treaties. These are every developing country now has some set of double taxation avoidance agreements or tax treaties with other countries. Many instances where these countries have had to probably sacrifice a bit of their sovereignty in trying to accommodate other countries just to meet their own investment needs. And once they do that, there has been this phenomena of other countries other enterprises trying to misuse those bilateral arrangements, misuse those set of treaties with different countries in ways that were never intended. And that's going to be something which will directly impact developing countries. India, of course, has a very wide network of treaties, but we still look forward very, very enthusiastically to these final outcomes, and then to the whole idea of a multilateral instrument where countries will be able to discuss, talk, negotiate, draft an instrument which can be agreed to by all or by several countries at one go without having to go through those bilateral discussions with each and every country. So those one will be some of the